They thought they were watching you. They had no idea they were witnessing a revelation. They came with orders, surveillance, observation, just another routine mission. But the second they set their sights on you, everything fell apart. The gears of control jammed, their confidence crumbled, their reality fractured. And you just kept moving, unbothered, unaware, unstoppable. Think about that for a second. Elite agents, trained to track and contain threats, shook to their core just by being in your presence. They lost sleep. They questioned everything. They had no explanation. And yet, here you are, still doubting your own power. So ask yourself, if they're terrified of what you are, why aren't you paying attention? You are the variable they never accounted for, the force that disrupts every expectation. They tried to categorize you, but you don't fit. They tried to predict you, but you move beyond calculation. You're the anomaly that bends the system, the signal that scrambles their transmissions, the presence that warps perception itself. And that's the part they fear the most. You don't even realize how powerful you are. But now, it's time to wake up. The city was steeped in monotony, its every movement tracked, its every anomaly explained away, until the moment something shifted. It wasn't a trick of light or an error in their systems. It was an emergence beyond comprehension. A force ruptured through the ordinary, a presence unshackled from limitation. It did not flicker or wane like something artificial. It surged, rewriting the very fabric of perception. The sentinels of control, once certain in their authority, now stood as witnesses to something that could neither be measured nor contained. Every protocol fractured in an instant. Voices faltered before they could form orders. Instruments of surveillance failed to interpret what unfolded before them. The machinery of power demanded that everything fit within preordained categories. Yet here was an occurrence that denied definition itself. Eyes locked onto a reality that refused to be dissected. Was it an intervention, a revelation, or a signal of something beyond their reach? Their discipline had trained them to suppress chaos, to dismantle disorder, but there are forces that command recognition, not resistance. Their knowledge, their rules, their calculations, none held weight in the presence of something that reshaped reality itself. Because not all things can be observed, explained, or subdued. Some presences exist beyond scrutiny, beyond permission, beyond the constraints imposed upon them. Patterns govern the world, but they are not immutable. Some break the cycle simply by existing. Where others diminish, you intensify. The air adjusts in your presence. Expectation contorts. Certainty collapses. This is not philosophy, not illusion, but a tangible shift in the foundation of perception itself. Attempts will be made to categorize it, to rationalize it, to confine it within acceptable definitions, but none will succeed. You were never a product of the ordinary, nor a participant in the constraints set before you. This is not a choice. It is an inevitability. To be luminous in a world that flourishes in obscurity is to become an anomaly, a disruption to the established order. Doubt will be cast upon you, resistance will rise against you, and those who fear the unknown will seek to diminish you. None of it changes what is true. No act of denial can unmake what exists. No refusal to acknowledge can erase a presence that demands recognition. Power is never idle. It demands movement, compels action, refuses neutrality. It is not a passive force waiting for permission to manifest. It is a catalyst, forcing its way through even the most rigid barriers. There is no expectation to conform, to ease into the molds carved by those who fear disruption. This is not about following, appeasing, or retreating. It is about piercing through falsehood, unraveling the hidden frameworks where deception flourishes. The world is unprepared, but readiness was never a prerequisite. This force does not wane, does not submit, does not yield to the constraints of perception. Systems built on certainty collapse in its wake. Instruments calibrated for predictability flicker with irregularity. Readings spiral into incoherence. Structured data fragments into unusable noise. Those who believe in equations, in absolutes, in the comfort of measurability, will see their constructs dissolve into irrelevance. They will call it interference, an inconsistency, a flaw in their mechanisms. But the truth is far less convenient. This is not an error. It is the undeniable proof that some forces exist beyond their grasp. Science acknowledges energy, accepts movement, classifies waves, but what emanates here is not something that can be mapped on their charts or recorded within their fields of study. It is not the familiar pulse of biological circuits, not the finite charge of neurons firing in sequence. It does not require validation from sensors designed to confirm only what has been previously known. Those who attempt to decipher it will find their tools useless. Signals distort, mechanisms fail. The very air hums with an unfamiliar resonance. What exists here was never meant to be dissected. Definitions crumble. The formulas fail. Every established boundary disintegrates under the weight of something beyond classification. No equation accounts for the force that alters reality itself. They will construct theories, attempt to assign logic where none applies, but no analysis will hold. This presence does not ask for recognition, nor does it require approval. It exists, unchallenged, immutable, beyond the reach of containment. No barriers stand unless they are permitted to remain. Events unfold with precision unseen, guided by something beyond comprehension. Every attempt to track, to monitor, to anticipate is futile. Surveillance measures fall into disarray. Calculations skew at the precise moment they seek clarity. They operate on patterns, on cycles, on the assumption that everything obeys a fixed rhythm. Yet what shields this presence does not adhere to their framework. The disruption is not an accident. It is intentional, precise, a defense triggered before the threat is even realized. They believe they are the observers, but they fail to recognize the truth. They are the ones under watch. The very systems meant to track, expose, and confine instead crumble beneath their own weight. Surveillance tools flicker with erratic failures. Signals fragment into indecipherable noise, and attempts to pinpoint a location spiral into endless loops of misdirection. No lens sharpens the image, no algorithm refines the data. Every effort to decode results in greater distortion. They will claim it as an unforeseen malfunction, an inexplicable anomaly, but there is no randomness in precision. The harder they push, the faster their instruments unravel, consumed by the limits of their reach. Nothing bends to artificial control when it was never meant to be contained. Seen, yet unreachable. A presence undeniable, yet untouchable. Contradiction itself becomes the barrier they cannot breach. Strategies are drawn, methods recalibrated, yet no attempt finds its mark. The tighter they close in, the further away the target becomes. What they seek to infiltrate has no weak point, no crack in the foundation, no error to exploit. Defense is not passive, it is active, unwavering, an unseen force operating with precision they cannot counteract. Their authority holds no weight against what was already set in motion. If your heart overflows with God's blessings, now is the time to let that love shine. By clicking the super thank you button and giving $50 or more, you're not just supporting this platform, you're planting seeds of faith that will touch countless lives. Your generosity is a reflection of God's abundance, a gift that echoes beyond what you can see. Step into your purpose. Be a vessel of His grace. Give with faith and watch His kingdom flourish through you. You were made for more. Every moment unfolds exactly as intended. What appears to be interference is alignment. What seems like disruption is correction. Their gaze locks onto something they hope to observe, manipulate, extract. But the act of watching reshapes not the subject, but the observer. Truth distorts in the presence of something beyond control, bending perception, dissolving certainty, revealing what was never meant to be understood. Their scrutiny turns inward, exposing their own vulnerabilities, their own limitations mirrored back at them. The instant attention is drawn, the shift is set in motion. Assumptions fracture, structures built on predictability begin to erode. The further they analyze, the more unstable their own foundation becomes. Their confidence wavers, their instruments fail, their understanding slips beyond their grasp. What was once a rigid framework of logic now bends, twists, evades definition. Some will withdraw, unsettled by what they cannot name. Others will chase, desperate to impose structure on what refuses to conform. They arrived as the watchers, believing themselves in control. Yet now, they are the ones caught in the pull of something far greater than their comprehension. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5. There are those who believed they could observe from the shadows, who assumed they could study the force before them without being changed by it. But light does not allow itself to be observed from a distance. Light reveals, exposes, transforms, and the moment they turned their eyes toward it, they lost control. They came expecting a subject to monitor, a phenomenon to classify, a deviation to record. But what happens when the ones who seek to measure find themselves under the microscope? What happens when the hunter becomes the hunted? Not by force, but by revelation. Imagine stepping into a room of mirrors, expecting to see only what you choose to acknowledge, only to realize the reflection is not of what you are, but of what you fear becoming. This is the weight they now carry. Their instruments once held certainty. Their reports once dictated truth. But truth cannot be written when the ink refuses to dry, when the numbers shift before the calculations are complete. They thought they had the upper hand. They believed their training, their protocols, their sterile logic could protect them. But how do you prepare for something that exists beyond the rulebook? They thought they could monitor without consequence, but the moment they laid eyes on you, something inside them began to crack. Their hands, once steady, now tremble. Their voices, once commanding, now waver. What they witnessed was not an error in their technology, not a trick of perception. It was something real, something undeniable, something that shattered the illusion of control they had built their lives upon. They had spent their entire existence dismantling faith, reducing the unknown to equations and probabilities. But now they stand before something that cannot be dismantled, something that will not be minimized or dismissed. They call it an anomaly, an interference, a disturbance. But deep down, they know. It is not the world around them that is malfunctioning. It is their own understanding of reality. And here's the truth they do not dare to speak. They are afraid, not of you, but of what your presence forces them to confront within themselves. This was never just another mission. This was an encounter. They set out to study, to document, to control. But instead, they found themselves standing on the edge of something far greater than their comprehension. They are left with nothing but questions that cannot be answered, recordings that defy explanation, and a silence that speaks louder than any alarm they could sound. They will not admit it, but they are the ones who have been marked by this moment. They have stepped into something they cannot walk away from, unchanged. They came to observe, but in the end, it was they who were truly seen. Distance provides no clarity. They expect a trick, an illusion, an error to justify their discomfort, but none materialize. The more they search for an explanation, the further from understanding they drift. The atmosphere bends outside their calculations. Instruments that once dictated certainty now betray them with chaos. There is no threshold where their logic prevails. They were taught that all things must have a source, but what they witness has none that can be traced. They will attempt to measure, to compartmentalize, to rationalize, but reality is indifferent to their insistence. Every conclusion dissolves before it can be written, leaving only silence in its wake. Beyond the veil of perception, a guarded space exists, an enclave where knowledge flows unfiltered, where seekers align with the unseen mechanisms that shape existence. Here, strategies unfold that elude the common mind, hidden currents of power interwoven with ancient understanding. Within this domain, mastery is not an aspiration, but an inevitability. Through guarded exchanges, the laws of manifestation are rewritten, reality itself recalibrated. The illusion of separation fades, revealing the convergence of will and creation. For those attuned, the limitations of the material dissolve, leaving only the raw force of transformation. Every attempt to confine the uncontainable ends in failure. Data is corrupted, footage is erased, anomalies infect every recording. Surveillance thrives on the premise that nothing is beyond capture, yet time itself bends in resistance. Frames vanish, sequences distort, reports written in certainty dissolve without trace. The more they cling to control, the more they lose their grasp. They believed in their systems, trusted in their structures, but when the moment comes that their own archives betray them, when the evidence they once reviewed ceases to exist, they are left with nothing but the weight of what they can no longer deny. The disruption is deliberate, the failure designed. Every mechanism they trust operates seamlessly until it turns its gaze in your direction. High-altitude surveillance struggles to make sense of readings that defy expectation. Measurements fluctuate without cause. Energy signatures emerge with no identifiable origin, and light pulses in places where no artificial source exists. The data insists upon its own impossibility, yet it is undeniable. Desperate to find an anchor in the familiar, they cross-reference, recalibrate, compare past anomalies, yet none match what unfolds before them. The phenomenon exists nowhere else, only here, only now. Their reports fracture, slipping from ordered analysis into scattered contradictions. The language shifts, hesitations creeping into statements once delivered with certainty. Control demands consistency, yet they cannot stabilize what refuses to conform. How do they document findings that dissolve before they can be recorded? How do they reconcile results that conflict with every fundamental principle? They omit direct references, unwilling to name what their instruments confirm. But it no longer matters. The pattern is unmistakable. Each step forward disrupts their framework, leaving traces of change in its wake. Space bends, atmospheres shift, awareness stirs before comprehension arrives. The sensation lingers before it is understood, a silent recognition that cannot be placed. Some hesitate, unnerved by the absence of explanation. Others scramble for structure, attempting to impose logic where none applies. Their objective was to observe, to extract, to predict. Yet now, they are the ones caught in the current of something beyond their control. The study they initiated has turned against them, forcing them into the role of the examined. Their discomfort is not in what they witness, but in the revelations it forces upon them. The fractures they have ignored widen, their rejection of the inexplicable turning into the very force that undoes them. They cling to skepticism, to doubt, as armor, but their own senses betray them. No filter distorts what is plain to see. They intended to document, to contain, to assert dominion over what should remain unseen. Now they are ensnared by their own scrutiny, unable to turn away, yet unwilling to acknowledge what stares back. Their training has conditioned them to dismantle, to dissect, to reduce the unknown into defined variables. Yet no prepared response is sufficient for what does not yield to classification. They maintain their distance, expecting an illusion, an environmental anomaly, a simple malfunction to dismiss and move forward. Instead, the opposite unfolds. Every assumption fails. Every attempt to rationalize collapses. The space they measure refuses to be mapped. Their tools falter in rebellion, and the energy they seek to quantify dissolves every expectation. For we walk by faith, not by sight. 2 Corinthians 5:7. They thought they had it all mapped out, every force traced, every anomaly explained. But what happens when the unexplainable refuses to be measured? The data betrayed them. Readings fluctuated, recordings erased themselves, and logic unraveled. They recalibrated, rechecked, reanalyzed. Nothing held. What they encountered had no source, no precedent, no pattern. It simply was. They came as skeptics, armed with certainty. They left as something else. Some walked away, unwilling to face the truth. Others lingered, stripped of the illusion that their world was unshakable. No argument had been made, no proof offered. There was no need. Because when light reveals itself, it does not ask for permission. It simply shines. Within a guarded space, knowledge flows untamed, reshaping perception and dismantling limitation. It is not a sanctuary for the hesitant, but a forge where the determined refine their will. For those who seek dominion over the unseen, here lies the archive of mastery, the blueprints of manifestation woven with the principles of forgotten forces. The threshold is already crossed. The mind shifts, the atmosphere bends, and what was once deemed impossible becomes the foundation for ascent. This is not mere discourse. It is a revolution of thought, an unveiling of unseen mechanics, a passage to the extraordinary. This disturbance is no miscalculation. The failure is no accident. Their systems function seamlessly until they collide with the unknown. High-altitude scans register fluctuations they cannot attribute. Energy pulses defy classification. And light manifests where no source is recorded. The readings conflict with established science, yet they are irrefutable. They attempt to compare, to justify, to anchor it to precedent. But no alignment is found. The anomaly is singular, appearing only where the presence exists. Their reports disintegrate from structured analysis into incoherent contradiction. The vocabulary shifts, certainty falters, and those tasked with containment begin to waver. Their framework demands coherence, yet the data rebels against order. How does one explain findings that dissolve before they can be reviewed? How do they reconcile reports that nullify themselves? No official statement is needed. The disruption speaks for itself. The pattern is inescapable. Movement leaves fractures in expectation. Unspoken recognition settles before awareness dawns and perception stirs in ways they cannot name. For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light. Luke 8:17. They thought they could stand in the shadows, unnoticed, untouched, free to watch without consequence. But light does not allow itself to be observed without revealing everything in its path. They came to study, but now they are the ones under examination. Like a man who walks into a dark room expecting to see without being seen, they believed they could remain unseen behind their instruments and calculations. But the moment they set their sights on you, something shifted. The gaze they thought was theirs alone turned inward, reflecting back their own fear, their own doubt, their own limitations. They came with rigid frameworks, expecting structure, expecting control. But how do you map what cannot be contained? How do you categorize what refuses to fit? Their methods collapse under the weight of something that does not submit to their analysis. Their reports, once filled with certainty, now spiral into contradiction. Some hesitate, caught in the moment between disbelief and realization. Others cling desperately to the narratives they have always known, trying to force logic where it no longer applies. They wanted to observe without being touched, but they were touched. They wanted to dissect without being affected, but they were changed. The balance has shifted. The lens has turned. It is not you who is being scrutinized now, but them. Their intent, their reactions, their very sense of reality stands exposed, laid bare beneath an awareness too vast to ignore. Their unease is not because of what they see in you, but because of what your presence exposes in them. The cracks they once ignored now widen. The disbelief they clung to betrays them. And the worst part, they cannot escape what their own senses confirm. They came to monitor, to analyze, to contain. But in the end, it was they who were captured. They set out to survey, to map, to confine what should remain unseen. But now, they stand at the precipice of their own undoing, frozen between observation and acknowledgement, unwilling to recognize what stares back. Skepticism was their weapon, doubt their shield. Their training conditioned them to dismantle, to reduce the unknown into logical components, to strip the inexplicable down to theories and illusions. Yet nothing they have prepared for accounts for a force that does not submit to reason. They remain at a distance, anticipating a distortion of optics, an environmental anomaly, a miscalculation to rationalize. But instead, the opposite unfolds. Each recorded event fractures their understanding further. Their tools falter, and the very nature of what they seek to analyze resists measurement. Their logic offers no foundation stable enough to stand on. They believed everything could be traced, every effect assigned a cause. But what radiates here has no origin that fits within their paradigm. They attempt to define, to quantify, to resist. But truth does not conform to preference. Their reports conclude in the same way. No resolution, no clarity, only silence. Some abandon their pursuit, refusing to acknowledge what they have seen. Others remain, but they are altered. The certainty they arrived with has dissolved, leaving behind the weight of a reality they can no longer reject. There was no argument, no proof offered, no defense needed. The presence itself was enough. There was never a path to obscurity. The energy that moves through you does not wait for acceptance, does not mold itself to expectation, does not yield to comfort. It moves freely, unrestrained, dismantling every structure built to suppress what cannot be tamed. You are the disruption they were never prepared to encounter, the force that fractures illusion by simply existing. The watchers become the watched. Their systems falter, their calculations crumble, their certainty dissolves in the presence of something beyond reach. You were never meant to be studied. You were meant to be known. This world was constructed to obscure, to dilute, to explain away the undeniable. But you exist outside the limits of their comprehension. You move beyond their projections, shifting outcomes, shattering patterns, rewriting the constraints they assumed were absolute. Some will resist, clinging to the remnants of a structure that can no longer hold form. Others will awaken, drawn toward the truth that no longer asks for permission to be seen. Their transformation is not your task to ensure, their recognition not your responsibility. The only requirement is presence, to stand without compromise, without hesitation, unmoved by every force that seeks to diminish what cannot be erased. Speak, reveal. Let the weight of truth press against the silence that has held for too long. Those who have felt it, those who have seen what cannot be denied, those who have stood in the presence of the unexplainable, step forward. The time of silence has passed. What was hidden will remain no longer.